We will need Bob Salinger to do any kind of official business at some later point if we're for a motion or anything, because he'll be our fifth for our quorum.
Well, I think we've got the acquisition working group update later in the agenda.
Yep.
So given that that's later in the agenda, we could probably get started to respect everybody's time here. And then if Bob has joined us by then, we'll be able to move forward. And if not, we will not.
Yep. We'll have Tiffany hit record. Oh, she's already recording. So we'll have that trimmed down. All right, I'm gonna hand it to you, Chad.
Very good. Thanks, Andy. Here to convene the Monday, July 8th meeting of the Private Forest Accord Mitigation Advisory Committee. Pre-meeting material has been sent out to the committee members, including the agenda. So I'll have Andy call roll, and then we will move into approval of the agenda with an amendment. Looks like we've got Bob Salinger joining us now.
Perfect.
And if you want to wait for Bob, maybe start with some others and let him get logged on.
Sounds good. We're gonna do a roll call, so please respond in the affirmative if you are present. Chad Washington.
Present.
Kristen Rivard.
Present.
Keith Curtis. Fran Caparata. Andrew Perkey.
Present.
Mark Stern.
Present.
Bob Salinger.
Present.
Mark Granbammer.
Present.
Jennifer Weichel.
Present.
Sarah Gregory.
Present.
Chris Allen. Kate Wells. All right. And I'm just going to ask for those who aren't on the committee, if we could make sure to turn off our camera, that would be helpful. All right, I'm going to hand this back to you, Chad.
Very good. Thank you, Andy. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to open the agenda. I'll say we do have one amendment to the agenda, and that is that agenda item 5, amphibian presentation, we will be postponing until we can have the full committee present to hear that presentation. And the focus of that will be on how we can better evaluate the quality of amphibian projects. After our last review, it was clear that, at least for myself, I didn't feel well prepared to evaluate amphibian specific projects and what components should or should not be included to make them a high quality project. So that's the purpose for that presentation. And again, it'll be delivered when we've got the full MAC in the meeting. So with that, aside from that, has everybody had a chance to review the agenda? All right. So I would move to approve the agenda with the amendment that we're going to strike agenda item 5 and postpone that. Any comments there? All right. Hearing none, Andy, we can approve the agenda and move to the consent agenda, which is just the meeting minutes from May. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those as well. Any requests for amendments to the minutes from our last meeting? Okay, again, hearing none, we'll just accept the consent agenda. Andy, did we have any request for public comment today?
We had no advance request for public comment or distribution of public comment, but at this time we can have an opportunity for those who may want to provide public comment. They can raise their hand virtually.
Do you have any members from the public that would like to provide comment? Not hearing any, Andy.
I'm not seeing any. Doesn't look like we have any public comment today.
With that, we are ahead of schedule and moving into staff report. Sandy, I'll hand it over to you and you can pass it to Jesse.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, again. So we have 2 items on our staff report. The first will be by Jesse Doyle, our Habitat GIS analyst here at ODF&W. She'll present on a brand new story map that actually took some time to create and highlight the projects that were funded in our first round of funding, our inaugural round. So we asked that as she kind of presents it, feel free after the presentation for a Q&A and an engagement. We're looking for room for improvements, recommendations, or accolades for her skills in the GIS story mapping at the end of it. But with that, Jesse, I'm going to hand it to you to please feel free to share screen and do the presentation.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me today to give a brief overview of the story map that we've created. For those who haven't seen story maps before, they're kind of an interactive PowerPoint format that specializes in spatial data. It allows users to kind of move through a map and zoom into areas of interest. And so me and Andy teamed up to create this for you all, and I'm excited to show it to you. We're hoping to get this out through social media and on websites and things like that. And we're working with our I&E team to do that. But I'm going to slowly scroll through it. Please stop me if I'm going too fast or I'm talking super fast. But this is kind of the general format. You can see that it has this lovely front page and project highlights from the 2024-2026 season. Just scrolling through quickly, you can see that these are some of the organisms that were highlighted in the grant program's selected funded projects, which was really cool. And then this is kind of the story map part of it, where it'll zoom in to the location of that project, give the grantee name, the provided project description, and then the habitat conservation plan covered species. You can zoom around in this area and zoom out as you would like. And then it has these buttons at the bottom of each project. You click on that and it'll open to our private forest page that highlights the projects, highlights which one, and then you can expand that to get more information about the project itself. Going back to the story map, you can then scroll to the next one, read more about that. And you can see all 25 projects are highlighted. You can skip ahead by changing these numbers if you'd like. I'm just going to do kind of a fast scroll real quick to go through this. But you can see that there's coverage throughout the state, which is really exciting. And you can see the areas that were highlighted with those green dots. We do plan on eventually updating also these project images. These are the ones that came with the applications themselves, but as things get updated, we can update images or information to better reflect that project that's happening. And sorry, I know this is kind of whiplash, so I'm going to try to go super fast through this. And then at the bottom here, we just have a little description of what the grant program is, a button on how to apply, which will take them to this web page. And then they can read more about our grant management system and find out more information on who to contact for grants and stuff like that. And so that's basically it. I'm happy to take questions or suggestions, and we can definitely keep those in mind and see if we have the capabilities to do that. But thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, we'll definitely be updating some GIS layers in there too as we start to receive those from grantees and provide some more information in the future.
Jesse, that's really cool. Is that just on the PFA grant website, or how do you access that? Is it live yet?
I can
Andy,
answer
do you
that.
want- yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so they're twofold. One, yes, it is live. It is on the grant page now. We will also be pushing that out as we begin with or continue our outreach and engagement campaign over the next year. So as we announce the next solicitation, this will get included, and it will just get built on for the years to come. You know, and I'm sure we'll start archiving some stuff as we start to get down the timeline. But no, we'll be pushing this out with everything, you know, whenever we talk about it, whenever we announce this grant program, it should be attached to it. Learn more, here's some example projects and some ideas. It's already linked in next year's solicitation too, or this fall's solicitation.
What a cool visual description of how the money is being allocated across the landscape and different project types. That's really great. One question, will they be able to add the year? So next year's projects, will they be orange dots or blue dots, or how will you have a layer that you can turn on projects by year and then also an aggregate of all the projects?
It's a good question. Yeah, so we can definitely add different colors. We can change even what the symbols look like. There's a lot of different options. And right now we haven't necessarily planned out what next year's is going to look like, but we do plan on making it look different in some aspect to differentiate between the two. We can also change the text accompanying each project, so we can also put the year in there as well. So great question.
Yeah,
I
it might
would-
be
I would-
helpful to have that ability to split them out year by year, but also to aggregate them to show total program impact
Mhm.
over the life of the program. Mark, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna second that. I think that's a really good idea, Chad, because I can say from the OCRF aspect, now that we've had 5 or 6 grant cycles over multiple years, you can't, it's nice to be able to see them all at once, but it's also nice to be able to see the different years as part of it all at once. So I think that's a great suggestion. But that'll be great. Obviously, it's something in the future, but a good one to note for now.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, and I mean, building on that, as we get more data, right, we're incorporate what we can, but I expect to be building on this in like statistics too, so we can start demonstrating what's being funded, not just visually on a map, but maybe, a page talking about where funding's going and how it's getting used and whatnot across the grant program too. So I envision that would be building on top.
That's
I
really
couldn't
cool.
s- I couldn't see it, but I think it'd be helpful if you had the dollar amount project. Maybe it was there.
Yeah, right now we don't have the dollar amount under each project's information. We do have it under that link, but I'm happy to put the
Yeah.
amount into the project description as well.
I would definitely do that. That should be there in the shorthand notes. That was our oversight. Great idea.
Great idea. Thank you.
That's a great point. And if the dollar amount is included as part of the tabular data, you might also be able to create heat maps or kind of a raster of where the money is going on the landscape to identify areas that are being funded more heavily, as well as areas that have received less funding that we could prioritize.
Yeah, I would love to be able to have some kind of heat map that even prospective applicants can trigger different fields too, and knowing what is being funded and what would fit into their area. Like, oh, that's already been funded. Maybe we'll pivot to a new priority for our area or something like that. That'd be great.
Thank you for your presentation, Jesse. I just think that is a really awesome tool.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, I'm gonna.
Andy, got subsection B here. Your
Yes.
update.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to move forward with a little bit more update on just the overall process. I was asked by the committee a few months ago to provide an update at some point in summer on the agreement process and just where we are in general with last year's solicitation. So I'm going to provide a little bit of update. Definitely encourage you guys to ask some additional questions afterwards, just in general. If you have questions about where we are in the process, I'm happy to kind of answer what I can at this time. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about how many grant agreements and contracts have been gone through the process. So we initiated the agreement review process with grantees in spring, actually. So right after commission approval of the initial wave of projects, we sent draft agreements to grantees immediately for review and revision. Right after commission approval, they got back to us. They got back to us really quick, and since then, our goal was to get agreements executed by July 30th of this year for our first round. And I'm happy to announce that our first agreement went out the first day of July. So we were 29 days ahead of schedule for our agreement process. That was just the first agreement. We still have 23 others to get out the door there, but we're making our way. We are about a month ahead of schedule. we're cognitive of, we're delivering agreements right at the start of summer, but we're trying to get them out the door. So that's really good. I've had individual meetings with every single grantee at this point about the agreement, if they had any questions about the revision. So at this point, it's just going through our process. Grantees have already seen draft agreements. It's either going to DOJ or it's routing internally to send back to the grantee to finalize and sign stuff. I expect by our next meeting, we'll have another handful, half a dozen to a dozen signed. It's really now in the grantees ballpark moving forward. We are sending some to DOJ over $250,000. And that's kind of where I'm at for that. I did have a question about reviews. We've gotten plenty of review requests. I think we're at like 7 or 8 grantees requested additional feedback on their proposals, why they were not funded. We came up with a very good, transparent process to provide them feedback from the reviewers, and they've appreciated that process, and we're continuing to engage and encourage those to consider reapplication later this year in the solicitation. So for all things, there's no major concerns at this point. We are chugging along and we are slightly ahead of schedule, and that's kind of the real brief update I wanted to give to you guys about where we're at in the agreement process. I expect most of our agreements to get signed in the next few months here and just get work going. So happy to answer any questions. And Kristen, I think I got you there.
Yeah, I was curious if you're getting, applicants that weren't successful are having questions about how to improve their projects, what they could have done differently. Are you also receiving feedback from those applicants in places where they see opportunities for improvement? Yes. And if so, how are you collecting and intending to share that information?
Yeah, great question. I appreciate that. I encourage, as you guys probably know, maybe too much, I encourage feedback every possible avenue possible in this grant program. If we want this to work for grantees across the state, we need to accept and interpret their feedback and incorporate it into the program. And I will say, we got great feedback the start of this year. And when you guys see the revised solicitation, I've almost incorporated all the applicant feedback to the most feasible possibility. Every single sentence was looked at. For any applicants on the call, your feedback was considered. It didn't go into a black hole. So no, they are still doing it. We have some that have provided more detailed feedback, questions about the review process, insights on how we can improve and be more transparent moving forward. So I'll continue to work with that ahead of our next solicitation. I do expect us to probably, as a committee, review the review process again at some point later this year. I'm already engaging with the services on that too, to make sure, and our other state partners who are involved in reviews, to make sure we're on the same page. But I'll bring that at later meetings, some of that other feedback in that process. I hope that answered your question.
That was great. Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for that update, Andy. I'm just curious how, in terms of a capacity for how well it's working, and I guess where I'm really going with that is, OCRF just approved a whole bunch of grants too, so working with the same contracting and grant creators.
Okay, I don't mean to interrupt you, but maybe it's just me. It's very difficult to hear you.
I'm have to talk a little closer to the mic for us.
Yeah, how about this? Is this better?
Much better.
Yeah, the question really was, OCRF just approved a whole bunch of grants too, and from a staffing perspective, are the contract grant, ODF&W grant administrator contractors, are they sort of, all stacked up, or is it different people working, or how is that sort of aligning now that both programs are up and running?
I appreciate that question. Yeah, and we share a lot of resources between OCRF and the PFA grant program. Of course, Tiffany diligently helps assist both programs. And we have a lot of lessons learned when projects have gone through OCRF and how to streamline that as projects go through our pipeline. All that being said, we have thought about staffing concerns and issues a few months ahead of time. So the PFA grant program actually has our own contractual staff member assigned to it specifically. And that is why, we have Claire's actually on the call here. Claire's been really great with us from our contracting department. And I think Marcus is here. But again, that's why we're 30 days ahead of schedule with our first contract. I didn't think we'd get the first contract out till really August 1st, but we beat that. And I would say that is because of our contracts team being so on top of it. The only projects I see for an extended delay would be from possibly DOJ. Again, that would be above $250,000 request. So I don't see any bottlenecks in the process at this point in time for staff capacity. Other than my own hands, I only have so many brains and fingers that we're the only other bottleneck, but we're not there yet.
Well, then I'll just also add, thank you, Claire, for the support. It sounds like you're doing a great job. Any other questions for Andy? Okay. We're going to move on to agenda item 6, and this is the acquisition working group update. So I'll provide an update on the recent acquisition work group activities and call that we had. If there are any gaps or any questions generated from that, then please let me know, and we can have a discussion, and then I'm prepared to make a motion at the end of the discussion. So to circle back with where we are at after the work groups, we've decided discussion was that we will allow water rights acquisitions for proposals with real kind of wet water benefits based on historic use. That we're going to be assessing the durability and that forbearance agreements may lack that long-term enforcement that we're looking for on water rights acquisitions. And we'll be looking at the different transaction types, whether that's in-stream leases, permanent dedications, or forbearance agreements. And that we'll need to use a separate technical review team for water rights transactions. And that will be developing its own scoring criteria that will include durability metrics for water rights acquisitions. Do we have any questions, or did I miss anything on water rights acquisitions before we move to the land? Okay. Seeing a thumbs up, not hearing anything. All right, so then we've also discussed conservation easement acquisitions. And some of the discussion around that was that these projects are going to have to be competitive, which is a pretty high bar set for the return on the investment. That that's not going to be a separate avenue for either acquisition. They're just all going to be competing against all the projects. We don't think it's appropriate from that discussion to have a minimum funding requirement in order to access an easement, as well as there shouldn't be a cap. So it's open-ended. We agreed in the working group that we should keep the definition of non-forested kind of loose initially. There may be a need to tighten that up over time based on how the first couple rounds of this go. But for now, we don't need to get too specific in how we define non-forested lands. We're going to focus on conservation easements for year 1. And there are some concerns about retiring economically feasible or kind of working forest lands. And so we are going to look to incorporate some language into the application that will at least offer some insight into how projects are going to work to not remove that productive land from production, or at least describe the impacts to the working lands component of the project. The goal here is to emphasize durable conservation outcomes in the language that's used, and to make sure that that easement is kind of the legal instrument that is going to ensure the outcomes. That's what I have from an update from the working group. I'm pretty sure that one's going to generate some questions or comments. So I'd open it up now if anybody's from the committee has anything they'd like to add, clarify. Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. Can you explain the context for why the non-forest? Like, where did that come into the conversation?
That came from the PFA author's report, where it specifically talks about easements and that they're to be on non-forested lands.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
I believe that was also in the legislation as well. So that term was in both the legislation and the author's report. So that's why it's in there for now. Well, with that hearing, Mark.
Yeah, sorry for moving the camera around. The mic on my PC isn't working, so I'm both on my phone and on the PC at once, so apologize.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, just a thought. I think it'd be helpful to have this in writing. Because I mean, I think conceptually what you've just described probably works, but
Mhm.
I think just if it's something we're going to approve as a group for a point in time, it'd be nice to see the write-up of it so that we just have that to respond to, or. And I don't-
Absolutely, Mark. I think that's a good point, and I think that the motion that I will put forward at the end of this discussion should address that. So point well taken. Having it in writing is helpful. Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to make a motion, and I would move that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff work towards the development of a comprehensive process for incorporating land easements and water acquisitions into the PFA grants program, and making sure that that is a transparent and efficient process. That's the motion. And Mark, I think that that language will result in transparent language that we can continue to refine, but this motion is intended to give direction to Andy to move forward with creating the pathway for land easement acquisitions and water rights acquisitions. That development process will result in what you've described, having this written down. That's the motion. I guess I'm looking for a second. I can restate the motion if needed. And maybe there's no second. Okay. Well,
Chad, could you restate the motion? And I guess if there isn't a second, and any members feel comfortable explaining why they either are letting this die or why they would like it to look different, that would be helpful. Just so we can push this forward.
Yeah.
Or in whatever way that needs to be for the group's consensus. I don't mean necessarily pushing Chad's motion for it, but I think we need to get to the end of this process, whatever that might look like. So, Chad, could you restate the motion?
Yeah, and the purpose behind this is to just give Andy and the department the direction and authority to start to establish a water rights acquisition program pathway that will compete with all the rest of the projects, as well as a conservation easement acquisition pathway. And so that's the purpose. This isn't saying that we're finalizing those pathways. It's just to give authority to Andy to move forward on the development of those programs. And so in order to get that done in an expedient manner and get them included as quickly as we can, I move that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff work towards the development of a comprehensive process for incorporating land easements and water acquisitions into the PFA grants programs as soon as practicable. Mark.
Yeah, I guess, Kristen, my hesitation a little bit is that when we talked about it last time, we also allowed for there might be circumstances or situations where land acquisition of non-forested lands might be appropriate down in a wetland or a pasture land or estuary where a landowner might not want the encumbrance of an easement and would prefer, or maybe the easement is complicated because there's other components to the operation of the project and would just rather sell the land. And so we talked about that might be one situation where outright land acquisition was appropriate. And even recognizing the concern that, you, Chad, and Heath in particular has raised about working timberlands. We also allowed, there might be instances where land acquisition of private forest land had some, good ROI and conservation benefits. So I think we all recognize the tension there and didn't want to, we're not trying to promote it, but I think we also had some conversation about not outright excluding it. So I think that's my pause here for the moment in terms of what the sort of in response to your question. And I think the other thing that I think would really help in doing it is to have some examples of each type of acquisition, just so that as we see acquisitions, whether it's water rights or just easement, some examples of what's eligible and what's not might be one thing that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. And there were some points of contention around that. And so I guess my motion is based on what we all agree on so that we can try to move something forward. But if that's not the time to do it, we can continue to deliberate and discuss. It just felt like we were in a spot that these things we all agree on, so we can move forward there and continue to discuss. But at the same time, Andy's working on, and the rest of the staff are working on those areas where we do have alignment, so that we're not delaying that component while trying to get this other stuff figured out. Kristen, you
John,
got
could
your
I
hand
ask-
up, and then Bob.
Yeah, I had one follow-up for Mark, which I do recall the conversation around working timberlands in those pieces, as well as the conflict with the statutory language, as well as the author's report on those items. And so I guess, notwithstanding your other question about fee title, which we could maybe tackle separately, do you feel confident to push ahead on those items, even if it's different than the statutory language and the author's report? And just curious how you're sort of dancing through that tightrope.
Yeah, well, I guess in some ways I would defer to, the authors on the committee, you, Bob, and Heath, because you guys worked through those conversations. I think there is another one of the criteria in the legislation that's sort of, it's a little bit of a catch-all that says, and or anything else that would provide benefit to these covered species. So I guess that's where my comfort level is in saying there may be unique situations where a different kind of acquisition actually is a benefit to PFA. And I think the other thing to remember is any acquisition is really based on a seller that wants to sell their land. So if it's, whether it's farmer's wetland or ag land or, acreage that has timber on it, there's something going on that's motivating the landowner to want to sell it. And again, land acquisitions are expensive. So I think that barrier, or the hurdle of being good on ROI and also providing benefit, is a pretty high barrier. So I don't think it's opening the door to a stampede of activity. It's just allowing for the possibility if and when that might be appropriate.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. I just want to highlight that the motion that I put forward does not preclude any of that. We can still discuss that. This just allows Andy to move forward with the parts where we do have agreement that are in alignment with both the author's report and the legislation. That doesn't permanently close any doors. It just opens the door to the things where everybody seems to be in alignment.
Yeah, I'd support that, especially if there was also another sentence that said, other aspects of fee acquisition are still being under consideration, and to identify that it's something that we haven't ruled out if we have not yet figured out exactly how it works.
All right, I'm gonna let Bob comment and then we can come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitated because I thought we had gotten there. I thought Heath had gotten there. You know, we talked through this. It feels a little like Groundhog Day because I thought it sounds very familiar to the conversation we had, and I thought we had agreed that those things were okay for all the reasons that we just discussed a few minutes ago. Again, where was the disagreement then? Because I thought we were okay on that at the end.
Yeah, but I think it's around the actual fee acquisition on forested lands, which is in conflict with the author's report and legislation on two fronts. We did discuss fee acquisition, lower watershed, non-forested lands, some bog that no longer has any value to retain. Although it gives me pause to include that in the motion, I could probably get there. But given that there's two members missing, to move forward with a motion, well, I'm just simply not prepared to provide a motion that includes a fee acquisition on forested lands. But I am prepared to move, as I've put on the table, this, and we can add, to Mark's point, further acquisition discussions are ongoing around eligible project type, whether that's a fee acquisition or where. But we did get to a point where that lower non-forested land acquisition was something that we became more comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, for all the reasons, you know, I know there was some frustration at the end of that meeting of we can't keep going round on this. We can't just keep having meetings. I'd love to capture whatever we captured and advance it. If there are pieces that we have not come to resolution on, then let's shelve those, but capture them as more discussion to come on those. But I think we should grab everything that we have agreement upon.
Okay.
And I agree with Mark too, that, you know, there's a high bar for all of this stuff as well. So simply allowing, you know, Andy to proceed forward and start to work on it doesn't mean that we're actually going to wind up spending a whole lot of money on any of these pieces necessarily.
Right. We will be spending resources in the form of Andy's time to build those things out. So, but you're right that they are going to be very competitive, and we did have a lot of high quality projects that we were not able to fund because we had more projects than we had funding. I imagine that'll be the case moving forward as well. But to your point, it is going to be a high bar to get that return on the investment.
So Chad, what, if anything, will we add regarding acquisition of lands lower in the watershed to this motion to instruct Andy to develop?
Well, I would be willing to amend it to, instead of stating incorporating land easements and water acquisitions, I would be willing to say land easements as well as land easements and acquisitions restricted to non-forested areas.
Okay.
I don't know how to word it to say land easements and acquisitions on non-forested areas, because we had talked about loose language and not trying to be too tight in our definition of non-forested.
Yeah, and I'll mention that, you know, there's still the purview of the committee, just like last round, to fund what you want to fund when it comes to the review process. When they are included. This is by no means saying anything in stone. This is just getting a first draft out there and out the door later this year for additional consideration. But at the end of the day, the buck still stops with the committee for recommendation to the commission. So you still have that authority for what gets elevated.
Mm-hmm.
And
Go ahead, Kristen.
Neither of us raised our hand. Sorry, Andrew. I was just going to say I appreciate that point, I also want to be careful that we don't waste applicants' time. If there's something that's not going to make it through, I want to be sure we, I just want to be respectful of people's time in preparing these proposals. So I guess that's it.
Andrew, do you want to finish your
Yeah,
thought and then Bob's got his
Yeah,
hand up?
Chad, just a follow-up question is there an accepted definition of non-forested land? Does that work for everybody, or could that be interpreted different ways? I don't know.
Well, we didn't talk about adding an accepted definition. There are definitions out there. And during the work group meeting, we decided maybe we don't want to get too specific on what we're calling non-forested and leave that up for interpretation.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want a acquisition of a critical riparian area to be excluded because there's riparian forest, but sounds like that's not going to be an issue.
Bob?
So, and Andy, I guess my question for you, just make sure I understand correctly too. We obviously have discretion on the approval side of the equation, but we also have discretion on what we put. I mean, I'm thinking about OCRF, where they come up with different approaches for different grant cycles. So we can tailor this piece or decide to include part of it, do a special, we have all that discretion as we go out each year and we develop. And I also just would note too that, I think we'll be able to refine more too when the HCP is finalized as well. And we really see what's in that and start to get feedback from US Fish and NIMS about how they're viewing this and what they're looking for as well. But I have that correct, Andy? Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So just like same for any solicitation, this will be included in our open solicitation yearly. It will be one of the funding categories along with research, implementation, planning and such. And acquisition will be there. And you will have the authority before that solicitation release to say what the priority is for the committee. That is the point of our open solicitation yearly. So yeah, you do have that authority.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Kristen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I would just weigh in that I'm supportive of moving forward anything at this juncture that we can have enough consensus on to advance. So I would weigh in there. The conversation around forested lands, what's the definition of non-forested, still does give me pause. And I wonder if the intent isn't more tied to marketable timberlands than it is tied to it being non-forested land. And if there's something in that kind of language that could shift, just allay any concerns as this committee turns over and maybe there isn't institutional knowledge. To Andrew's point, we don't want to prohibit protection of a really spectacular forested riparian area that, that said, there's questions about why would we be acquiring it if it's already protected under the HCP. There's a bunch of other, depending on the land type, there's so many questions that it opens, but rather than trying to dissect all of those pieces, is it really a question of marketable timberlands, not whether something has trees on it?
I think that is the purpose, Kristen. It's twofold. One, it's around wood supply. And two, it's around the expanded riparian buffers is the foundation for the HCP, and that this group, our task is to kind of add an additional uplift. It is not to be the foundation of riparian protections through acquisition of land or conservation easements that go beyond the new regulatory requirements. I'm a little hesitant to remove the language of non-forested if we continue to keep the acquisition piece in there. Because although, as Mark pointed out, there is a catch-all term at the end of the report and at the end of the legislation, it does not feel intellectually honest to me to do something different than what is described in the section outlined acquisitions and easements and say, well, we're going to use this last sentence at the end of the report for anything we didn't think of as a mechanism to go back and change the negotiated terms in that report. So I'm not as comfortable removing the non-forested language. And again, I think we're getting into potential things that may be an issue. We could probably come up with potential issues for the rest of the year and probably into next year as well. We can address exceptions as we move forward. If we start to see projects that we're missing out on, or hear of projects and opportunities we're missing out on. But I'm just not as comfortable removing the non-forested language if we're going to also include the acquisition language of fee acquisition. Kristen, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to just to belabor this for 3 hours, but I think I fall slightly on a different side of that, which is that if the intention is really about marketable timberlands, I think that's what the language should be. The question of whether or not either a conservation easement or a fee acquisition is double dipping on something that already has protections by way of a potential future HCP, which we all realize has not yet been approved. I think that would shake out in the review of the project, because it would immediately raise the question of, well, why? What's the additional uplift by doing this? What are we creating? What's the benefit for the covered species in doing this? And so I don't know that this group has to upfront imagine what all of those scenarios are kind of in a hypothetical space. I think we could be consistent with the author's negotiation of not wanting to use this forum to take marketable timber out of production while leaving the door open to the good projects that someone might bring forward, that it's probably difficult for us to imagine all of those scenarios. If the proposal is to do something that doesn't create any difference from a regulatory framework that already exists, I don't think that project would rank very high. So I guess I feel like we don't need to have tighter language to prevent that, would be one perspective.
I guess I need to move around more in my office. The lights are going off. Well,
Lastly, I will say I'm not going to follow my sword over this. I want Andy freed up to get working on as much of this as we can move forward right now. So, yeah.
I'll just restate the motion again with the amendment about the non-forested land acquisition, fee acquisition, and those kind of lower watershed areas. And that would be that I move that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff work towards the development of a comprehensive and transparent process for incorporating land easements and fee acquisition that is restricted to non-forested lands, as well as water acquisitions into the PFA grants program as soon as practicable. Just that last piece is just in recognition that we're already up against a pretty tight timeline to get them included in this year's solicitation, but that if we can get working on this, hopefully we can get them in the next year's solicitation.
I second that.
Mark, do you want to, thank you, Andrew. Mark, do you want to say something before we take a vote?
Yeah, I guess just with the understanding that there's another aspect of fee acquisition that we've made reference to that we can talk about at another time. And, you know, I'm even sort of reminded from the last meeting at the end, you know, Heath, who's obviously has very strong views about this, said, yeah, there might be, he goes, I don't like it, but there might be an instance where using funds to acquire timberland made sense. You know, I'd have to be convinced of it, but that he wouldn't completely rule it out. So I guess
I don't think we're ruling that out at this point, Mark. We're just trying to move something forward.
I totally support moving something forward. I just want to be clear that, you know, there's that aspect of the conversation that still open-ended.
Yeah, and
Everybody's clear on that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure we're not pushing it off the table, and I think we need to get it on the agenda to bring it back and resolve it.
Yep. Agreed.
Is that a special meeting with Heath, or is that, how do we close the door on this thing for once and for all?
I think we have one more acquisition work group meeting to put a bow on this prior to Kristen and Heath departing from this committee.
Okay.
So currently we have a motion and a second. I'm not going to restate the motion again. I've said it a few times, so we're not closing any doors. We're just giving Andy directive to move forward on what we've described.
Right.
So with that, I think we're ready for a vote.
Did you want?
Do you want to
did
do
you
a
want-
roll call vote, Andy?
I was gonna ask if you want to do a roll call or, okay, that's fine. So as I call your name, please respond, if you support or not the motion. Chad Washington, yea or nay?
Yay.
Bob Salinger,
Yes.
Kristen Regard,
Yes.
Andrew Perky,
Yes,
Mark Stern,
Yes.
all right? Carries,
All right.
and back to you, Chad.
Great. Thank you.
Chad,
Andy.
real
Andrew.
quick comment. Wanted to wait till we were done with this. I'm just struck, and this is just anecdotal comment. And I asked the question at our last meeting whether we had consulted with any of the ag groups in terms of their position. But, their opposition to buying up working farmlands and other programs is super strong. And here we are supporting that in this program
Mhm.
and saying no to working timberlands. So just an observation more than anything.
Andy,
I
that's
get why the resistance is there. I understand it, but it just is interesting that we've included that in our program, which I support. I think it's good that we have an
Yeah.
opportunity to buy some critical bottomlands if they become available.
yeah, well, those tensions might surface in the form of public comment.
They might.
But I'll just say that what we've done so far to date is directly in line with the PFA authors report as well as the legislation. So we have not gotten sideways with that to date,
No, I appreciate that.
other than the fee acquisition component. But again, that came with quite a bit of deliberation. I don't know, 2 years worth. Mark, you've got a comment?
No, sorry, I'm messing with my phone, so.
All right. Well, that was agenda item 6, and 7 is just the committee closing comments and meeting wrap up. So is there any other comments from the committee related to our previous agenda item or anything else today? Okay. Andy.
I just want to kind of prime the committee, if you don't mind, Chad,
Yeah.
for the next few months, what workload may look like coming up. And apologize, I probably should have said this at the beginning. I kind of touched base on it shortly. In the next few months here, next month or two, plan to share the revised solicitation with you guys, which will be a pretty heavy lift to read through. There's not a lot of revisions, but like I said, to one of Kristen's comment earlier, we've incorporated a lot of feedback. So I do plan to share that soon. I'll talk with the chairs later this week about if it's going to be August or September, but I do plan that to be coming to your guys' neck of the woods for review. And it's probably about 30 or 40 pages for that solicitation with all the attachments and everything. So I just want to put that on your radar for August or September for review. And then we do plan the same timeline for the review process. You guys will have a month from about mid-February of next year to mid-March for your guys' review of projects. That was it, Chad. Just wanted to paint out some real brief timelines.
Great. I think that is it. I did want to say, Bob, I saw that you had banded some peregrine falcons, and I just thought that was super cool. If you want to take a minute to just tell us what that was about, just out of general interest. If no one else is interested, that's fine. We're pretty much done, but I want to hear this.
Sure. No, I've been banding peregrines on bridges since around 1995. So each year we just go in to sites that we know peregrines are at, try and put bans on them. They actually has given us a lot of information about our urban peregrines and how they disperse, where they go. We know, for example, that Fremont Bridge in Portland has produced 4 or 5 other nest sites that have been active for, a couple of decades now. So just kind of a fun side thing that I get to do.
Yeah, that's super cool. And a fun thing to wrap up the meeting on. Andrew Perky, you're on mute.
Thanks, Chad. And Bob, are you heading up Willamette Riverkeeper now? Is that the next step? Did I read that?
I am. I'm now the executive director of Willamette Riverkeeper. So as of about 3 weeks ago, became
Great.
executive director. And you can see our offices behind me. We're in an old auto garage with a lot of canoes.
I could,
Awesome.
that's what reminded me that I had read it. I saw all those canoes. I was like, oh yeah. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Congrats, Bob. All right. Well, that feels like a nice way to end the meeting. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.